I want to talk about adrenal fatigue, but I also want to talk about menopause, the big M.
The big M.
The big M. I'm going to be double nickels, 55 this year. I am in the thick of it. And I would love to talk to you about what the fuck is going on with our hormones and our bodies. And why isn't there more information? I mean, it affects half of the population, for crying out loud. So where do you want to start, Dr. Amy?
I think the menopause conversation needs to be had, and much more commonly and much more openly. Most women go through this time of life and they have no idea why their anxiety level has increased, why their energy has decreased, why they feel like there's a brain fog. People will present with ear itching, body itching. People will...
Wait, that is something that's
part of menopause.
It is?
Yes.
That explains body. Did you just see me as we were walking up? I was itching my back as if like I had just been bitten by a mosquito. Why does your body? I'm going to hijack this conversation so fast. So keep going with the weird ass symptoms.
Yeah, I think the biggest symptoms that people feel is the brain fog.
Yes.
That happens with menopause, and the mood changes. The feeling of hot and then cold, the hot flashes and then the sudden change in temperature. Like, what is happening? Why are we feeling like this? And we don't have the conversation enough. And so everybody's kind of feeling like they're going crazy.
Yes.
And one of the biggest complaints, and I know that we'll touch on this, is the increase of fat around the middle.
Yes.
So brain fog, fatigue, the increase in fat, especially around the middle. And all of these weird symptoms all have to do with your changing hormones.
Okay. You're going to have to break this down for us because the conversations that I'm having with my girlfriends, it's all about the fact that we're going through this metamorphosis. I feel totally out of control. The last time I felt like this in my own body was when I was going through puberty. And I started to get, first you get those like knots or whatever they're called, bumps or whatever they are. And then you get the boobs and then hair starts to grow in places that is scary and then hilarious. And then you're just living with it. I didn't feel that way about pregnancy when my body was changing because I was so excited about it.
Yeah.
And because there is so much written and that you can read about pregnancy and it's so celebrated that you kind of know what to expect, even though when it's your first time, it feels so foreign. But this feels so out of control. And I also am glad that you're here because because I know it's also a really frustrating time for the people who know and love us. Because it's not just the hot flashes. I have hot flashes in my mood. Like I will swing from happy to bitchy like a kitchen door swinging. It just goes from one to the other. And so how do we should we start with understanding what's going on?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just understand the fact that we don't talk about it enough. In the medical sense, we talk about it all the time with our friends and colleagues. I mean, your conversations with your friends and my conversations with my friends match. It's menopause all the time, right? Because we're all trying to figure out what's going on with our bodies. We're trying to help each other because we don't have enough guidance. It's not like pregnancy where you can say what to expect when you're expecting on day 22, you know, that kind of thing.
And Andy, one other thing I will point out is that you read all this stuff and we now know that the studies were largely wrong about hormone replacement therapy.
Yes.
And I went to 3 different primary care doctors that were holistic doctors in the Boston area and asked about bioidentical hormones, and not a single one of them could refer me to anybody. And so I also feel like there are a lack of resources that are accessible to women in terms of understanding what the fuck to do. But I guess we should start with what the fuck is going on.
Exactly. And the problem is that in our lifetime, I think you and I are similar in age, pretty similar. And I was in school when they actually mandated that women be included in medical studies.
Wait, what? They had to mandate?
Women were excluded from all medical studies because they're fluctuating our fluctuating hormones, or the fact that we could be pregnant during a time of a trial. And so every medication, every intervention, every surgery, everything was done only on men.
Well, I knew that about the ADHD studies in the late 70s and why ADHD has been misdiagnosed at profound levels for women because they only study boys. I had no idea that all of the medical studies related to the effect of anything. What why are people not talking about this?
I know.
How do we even know then whether or not the side effects of something are going to impact us versus the way they impact dudes?
In fact, what they realize is what they were just doing is they would just prescribe a smaller dose to women.
Sort of like a golf tee that's closer to the green.
Yeah. It's like they didn't know anything about the biology of women, but they just said, well, let's just give them a little less. They're just smaller, than men, and thinking that medications are going to affect us the same way as they would have in men. And that's why women feel like they are the forgotten gender when it comes to healthcare.
Wow. So what year was this in medical school?
I think it was it's the 80s where they had to mandate that women be included in all studies.
Wow.
Yeah. And then on top of that, what they weren't doing, and they still don't do, is they weren't seeing the impact on hormones. And what women are calling out, doctors are calling out, and they're saying, all right, you're studying, now you're forced to include women, but you're not actually seeing what the impact is on our hormones, if any. And maybe there's no impact, but why not look at what's happening when you're taking medication X? What's happening to the estrogen, progesterone, the testosterone? There's no data.
Well, if you think about women and the fact that estrogen is like a just controlling and essential hormone as part of the whole network of the way that we function as women, the monthly cycle that we have. I can't believe that they're not looking at the impact on hormone levels. That's kind of scary, honestly.
It's a shame. In fact, when I was a young mom, I had my kids were 1 and 3, and I was out of the postpartum range. But I felt so out of control. Like I felt burned out, but then I couldn't sleep. My hair was falling out, but my thyroid levels were fine. And I was so confused about my hormones. So I thought maybe I just didn't pay attention to that part of medical school, or maybe I just didn't, So I went to the hormone experts, so-called OBGYNs, my colleagues who were specialized in women's health or women's, and they said to me, oh, we didn't learn about that either. We learn about pregnancy, we learn about puberty, and then all you learn about menopause is that it just shuts off, and that's basically all we know. And so I said to myself, well, that's really sad, because at least half of the population is women. Yeah. And if doctors can't even know, if they don't even know what's going on, then how are women going to know what's going on?
So what do you want us to know in terms of the 101?
All right. Let me tell you. It's like the best analogy is like two sisters. Okay. Estrogen is your social. And she's super smart. She's super social. She is outgoing. She can be a little bit risk taker. She can be a little bit out of control.
Got it.
Then you have the sister, the progesterone sister. Okay. She's very calm, level-headed. She knows when the other one's like kind of going off the rails. Yeah. She's the one that kind of keeps you at home. Says, no, study to, stay at home. Yep. Let's just chill. She's the one that keeps you calm. Okay. So when we're going through menopause, we are getting less estrogen and less progesterone. So you're starting to feel like you're not as sharp. You're not taking as many risks. You're not as social. Yep. Your level of estrogen is going down. Gotcha. You might not have the energy levels. Yep. You might not feel like doing the things you used to do. Your activity level might go down just without even realizing it. You're just sitting more. As progesterone goes down, you start to get more anxious. You start to feel like you can't sleep. And you start to feel like your life is out of control.
Wow.
And so what you're noticing...
Is this also why I'm waking up in the middle of the night?
Yes.
The drop in estrogen and progesterone is why I'm not sleeping through the night?
Yes.
I thought it's because I had to go to the bathroom, but it's probably because of the hormones?
Yes.
So Dr. Amy, talk to us about women's hormones throughout her lifetime. What do we need to do to optimize our life throughout every one of these stages that women go through, from puberty to menopause?
Yeah, that's a great question. So women start their hormonal cycles at puberty. And so you basically see a big surge of hormones and all the aftermath that happens with it, from, periods to breast development to body fat distribution changes. There's all kinds of brain changes that happen during puberty. And it's the hallmark is the period. Mm-hmm. And when you start that period, from then till menopause, every month you have a cycle. And I think what is a pet peeve of mine is that women often aren't even taught what their cycle is and what to expect and how to manage it, because you just go through life thinking it's just an annoying period, but you don't really learn anything more about it. So the first day of your period is a very momentous day. It's the start of your 28-day cycle. And the reason why I think it's important for us to understand is that you're starting, basically, when you shed the lining of your uterus, that's your period, you're starting over. So now, from day 1 of your period all the way till day 14, you get a rise in your hormones. And if you don't get pregnant, then you're going to get a fall in the hormones.
Get a fall in what hormones?
Estrogen rises throughout the first part of the cycle, and progesterone actually rises too. They're kind of different peaks, and but they do. And testosterone has a little spike closer to ovulation, so day 14. But what's really the interesting part is that at the latter half of your cycle, if you're not going to be pregnant, so most months, you're going to be experiencing a fall in your hormones. And I think it's really important for women to realize that you can train and eat and fast and live differently throughout those different changes of your hormones to match what's happening. So from day 1 through day 14, when your estrogen and progesterone levels are getting higher and climbing, especially towards that day 14, you're going to feel more energetic. You're going to be more stress resilient. You're going to be able to do more workouts. So I always talk about that time as like train like an athlete, eat like an athlete, eat more, train more. Energy levels are good. Stress levels are good. This is a time to try out intermittent fasting, or just kind of like that time restricted eating that I was saying, like no food 2 to 3 hours before bed, and try things out. Mm-hmm. At the latter half of your cycle, especially that 1 week before the period, so day 21 through 28, so it's called the late luteal phase, so the latter part of the luteal phase, when your hormones are really dipping down there, the kind of mini menopause, I call it. That's when you pull back on the very stressful activities. You pull back on eating lots of, like maybe you're eating a lot more treats or sugar or carbohydrates in the first half of the cycle. That's when you want to pull back a little bit. Mm-hmm. You want to realize that your body is less stress resilient. So maybe this is not the time to take on all the projects and to be skimping on sleep and to be working out excessively and to be adding the intermittent fasting for the first time. Like, you don't want to be testing your stress resiliency at this time if possible, because according to your own cycle, this is the time that you're going to be least stress resilient, also going to be more insulin resistant, which is why I said to maybe come down on the sugar and the carbohydrate level, start to eat more fiber and protein to keep yourself fuller. And so when you understand that, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. I naturally don't feel like doing my high intensity workouts the final week of my period, or, you want to get more sunlight or more massages or more walks. And like, that's a way to manage the last week of your cycle. So from the time you hit puberty to the time you go into menopause, you have these monthly cycles. So I think it's imperative for us to learn them and to learn how to optimize them. So when we know that there's a testosterone burst in the middle of the cycle, like around day 14, if you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to do something that requires a little more confidence and bravado, maybe it's asking for a raise, maybe it's doing that thing that you're really scared to, and you have some ability to schedule that, the mid-cycle time is the time to do it.
Wow, this is so interesting. If we were all clued into this in terms of how to optimize your energy or your focus during certain stages of your cycle, and if we knew what really worked for our bodies from a younger age, by the time we get to menopause, we wouldn't have to have the discussions that we're having today. I mean, it's kind of lame that as a 54-year-old woman, I'm still going, what the fuck is going on with my body?
Exactly. The problem is that the more the world is a man's world, at least the medical research world, because that's what we've researched. And so because we don't have enough research on this topic, it's almost like, well, where's the research that says that there's this happens in women? We don't have 10,000 women studies where we look at their cycles and we look at menopause. I mean, we need that. We need that data. So we can say, hey, if you are trying to optimize your muscle mass, you should be training hard in the middle of your cycle. Like, where are those studies? Where is the data? So we have a toolbox. So instead of speaking in a hypothetical sense, in the physiological sense, we have hard data like we have for other things.
That makes a lot of sense. So a woman goes through puberty, she gets her menstrual cycle, and then what happens when somebody gets pregnant? What happens to the hormones then?
So basically what happens is, if at ovulation, the egg gets fertilized, the hormones stay high. They don't drop to let the lining shed. So as the hormones, they stay high, you get obviously HCG. People know this because this is the one hormone that actually rises during early pregnancy. You get, and that's what you check when you pee on a stick is the HCG levels, or in the blood, you can check the HCG. That's the hallmark that says, oh, the body knows that you're pregnant and it's released HCG because there's been an implantation. And so you don't get the whole last part of your cycle that you usually do. There's no late luteal phase. There's no PMS. Your hormone levels stay high, at those levels for the duration of the pregnancy. And then when you have the baby, it can take a few months actually to normalize. There's some fluctuations, but then you'll go back to having kind of that approximately 28-day to 32-day cycle with the rise and fall of hormones.
And then there's perimenopause. I guess this is like the warm-up for menopause. I mean, what happens there?
Perimenopause is your estrogen and progesterone are at the bottom, are getting low. So if you've ever had toothpaste, like a tube of toothpaste, when you kind of get to the end of the toothpaste, sometimes you press on it and you just get a splatter. And sometimes you press on it and you get a full squeeze of toothpaste. And sometimes you press on it and you get nothing. And so that's what's happening during perimenopause. Some months you're getting a good dose of estrogen and progesterone, you almost feel like you're normal. And other months you have a low level and you're getting all these symptoms. And some months you're feeling absolutely terrible because your hormone levels are super low. And so you can have a lot of fluctuations during this time where that's perimenopause. Basically, you're getting to the end. A menopause is there's nothing left. Your levels are very low. You're not ovulating anymore. And so the years of perimenopause can be long, confusing, and variable based on what's happening. So one of the things that people talk about is hot flashes. And the reason why hot flashes happen is one of the roles of your hormones is to tell your brain center, your hypothalamus, your temperature center, what to do, like how to regulate our temperature. So that month, if you just get a splatter of estrogen or you get none, you get dysregulation of that central thermostat. And so now you're hot, you're sweating, and you get these peaks and valleys of temperature. And so that's how I would describe perimenopause, and that can happen for multiple years. And that's why there's treatment now, like there's things you can do. Hormone replacement therapy is really good for that kind of hot flash temperature dysregulation. That seems to help. And so you have all that. And then you hit menopause, and menopause, the definition is no menstrual periods, so no ovulations for 12 months. And so a full year goes by, you don't have fluctuations anymore. You're just at low levels. And so for women, often at 5 to 10 years after menopause, they are able to now kind of get acclimated to the no hormone state. So it seems like the fluctuations of the hormones are wreaking havoc on our brain and our body. But then once you kind of normalize at a lower level, about 5 to 10 years, you seem to have a reprieve of the symptoms. So you're no longer getting the hot flashes. You're no longer having some of the menopausal symptoms. No menstrual period for 12 months. Okay. But the drop in estrogen and progesterone that we're talking about here happens up to 10 years before menopause.
Wow. So, what's interesting is that I started to see a big spike in sort of fogginess and feeling like it's something wrong, probably like in my, I'd say, early to mid 40s.
Yes, that's very typical. So it can be as early as 35 for people who are going through menopause a little bit early, but usually in your 40s, especially your mid 40s, is when people really start to see, that exercise that I was doing is not working to control my weight anymore.
Well, everybody that I know that is in this range and is talking about the fact that their body shape has changed.
Yes.
That there is this thickening in the middle. My sister-in-law, who I love, keeps referring to her body as a Twinkie. I'm just like a Twinkie with legs. I'm like, will you shut up? Stop.
That's hilarious.
And, I know that I'll get flack for saying this because I'm a lean, athletic build kind of person.
Yeah.
But all my pants fit very differently now.
Yeah.
It's as if I have a, like those inner tubes that you sit in a pool. It's like I've put one from the belly button to the crotch and around the back too. It's like all of a sudden it's filled out. So my pants don't fit anymore, even though it doesn't seem like my body's changed. I mean, it looks like it has.
Yeah.
Why are we all, I could not do more crunches. I couldn't eat healthier if I tried. I am already getting 8 or 9 hours of sleep. For God's sakes, I've cut back on the alcohol. I smoke a little weed here and there. That's not putting on the shit in the middle. I don't even get the munchies when I smoke weed. Why is this happening?
This is happening.
It doesn't seem fair.
I know. It's because our estrogen levels, as they start to drop, our body is looking for more hormonally active cells. So what I mean to say is the fat that you accumulate in your middle, it produces estrogen.
Okay, wait a minute.
Fat produces estrogen.
What do you mean fat produces estrogen?
Fat cells.
You didn't say that the estrogen sister was a fat sister. You just said that she was the one that was the party girl.
Yes.
Okay, so fat cells?
I was talking about the estrogen and progesterone that are primarily coming from our ovaries when we are prior to menopause, premenopausal. Okay. But as you get into menopause, you start to get a very big dip in your estrogen.
Oh, that's true, because you're not going to be producing children anymore. Yes. So does the estrogen and progesterone supplies that are part of the reproductive system start to drop?
Yes. Oh. And then as your estrogen, progesterone gets lower, your body starts to do things to try to compensate for it.
So it's looking for fat.
Yes.
Do we also get flabbier around the arms?
I'll tell you why.
I feel like even as I'm like, where did these wings come from?
Yes. That's because estrogen, the other thing it does.
What?
It helps us keep our muscle mass. So when you decrease your estrogen over the years.
So I'm not going crazy. I literally have been looking at my arms going and saying to myself, something is wrong with my arms. I realize they're toned, but they used to be a lot toner. I don't know if that's the right word, but they're like flappy now. And I'm like, what is that?
1 to 3% of muscle mass.
Yes.
Is like basically per decade, you would say up to 3%. But as you go into menopause, it goes faster, meaning that you're losing muscle at high rates. If you're not also weight training, eating the protein. So one therapy I can tell you right away for your arms.
Tell me.
Is to start to do more weight training, start to build muscle in the places not only that it was, but that you can build more muscle on. So this is the best time to pick up some weights.
Oh, I use the tonal machine at home. I'm doing the things, Doc.
More things than you used to.
Ugh.
That's the key.
That's not fair.
So what I'll tell you is that what we found is that when people start to go into perimenopause and their estrogen drops, their activity level drops a little bit and they don't even notice it. So you may be gaining some fat cells, not only because of the estrogen drop, saying to your body it needs more estrogen from fat cells, it's because your body is not as active as it used to be. And it's very subtle. And you might not even notice it until you say, oh, I used to naturally just get up and walk and I used to get 10,000 steps. And now, so one of the other things you can do as someone, if we're talking to our friends, we're talking to the audience, increase your activity level, your baseline activity, even if you don't want to.
So, but I keep seeing, and I realize that, Dr. Amy is a New York Times bestselling author and a medical doctor, people. And she's also has a degree in nutrition and a dual degree in allergy, right? And there's
allergy
a fancy
immunology.
word. There it is, that fancy word. And so I see shit on TikTok about gotta lift weights, gotta eat more protein. Is that what you're talking about with activity level?
Yeah.
So what do we need to switch up? Because the other thing that I was talking with a friend about is she's like, I'm on that Peloton like every day, Mel.
Yeah.
And I am not seeing any results whatsoever. And it's not Peloton's fault. Something is going on with my body.
Yes, it is. And she's not crazy. That's the biggest thing is I feel so bad because my mom, when she was going through menopause, felt like she was going crazy. She's had anxiety. She couldn't sleep at night. She was gaining weight. And she was like, I feel like I'm literally going crazy.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the sad thing is that it happens to everybody.
Yep.
Mammals, humans are one of the only animals on the planet that go through menopause, by the way.
Really?
Most animals reproduce till they're dying until they die.
Well, thank God we don't. I mean, that would be absolutely awful.
So the fact that we live past our reproductive years is pretty unique. Into the human race.
One of the reasons why I wanted to do this topic with you, Dr. Amy, is because selfishly, I want more information for myself, for my friends, for listeners that are writing in about this. But you'd be surprised the number of requests we're getting for information on this topic from husbands and sons of women going through this because they don't know what to do. And my daughter recently said to me, Mom, every one of my roommates is telling me that their moms are calling, just like you're calling me, and they're bitching about their foggy memory or the weight that they've gained. So can you please do something that you can like have as an episode that would help people? And so what are the top 5 things that people complain to you about when they come see you for help with nutrition and hormones? And how do you attack fixing them?
The number, I would say number 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so number 1 is definitely the weight gain. The weight gain is very frustrating because if you're an active person, we're already living in a world that's working against us, right? We already talked about that. This world, the default is that we are going to be in the categories of medically overweight or obese. 73% of Americans are there now.
Wow.
It's going to be at 85% before we know it, right? So we're already working against this. So most of us are already metabolically challenged. We're already fighting against this battle. Then we got to deal with the estrogen going down, which makes you less active, less energetic, and losing your muscle mass. So now you have more fat, and it's making your mood a little bit lower, right? So the therapies that I recommend, a lot of them have to do with things to counteract the changes in the lowering of estrogen.
Okay, like what?
So walking more. So what I tell women is like our cortisol levels can be really high when we're doing tons and tons of high intensity exercise. So it's better to have a baseline of walking, and you can do bouts of HIIT if you want, but really having more activity. It's called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. NEAT activity is actually a bigger driver of our weight.
What is that last word? Thermogenesis?
Yes.
Non-activity, non-electric. What I can't keep up with. What is thermogenesis? That's a big word.
Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Thermogenesis is metabolism.
Okay, so what is a non-exercise? Is walking
walking? So if you're not walking for exercise, so the thought is you wear a watch or you wear a pedometer, you park farther, you take the stairs, you take your dog for a walk, all the stuff that you don't count as exercise. That's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That has to go up.
Okay.
If you're in perimenopause and you want to fight the weight gain, that's where it starts.
And so the reason why running or HIIT classes aren't the greatest thing for women in this category is because it spikes your cortisol?
So,
and what does that have to do with estrogen?
So women tend to do activities. So the other thing that happens when your estrogen is going down is you're less stress resilient. So I'll give an example for women who even aren't in menopause or perimenopause. The week before your period, you're just less stress resilient. You can't handle the things that you usually can handle.
Yes,
so
Dr. Amy,
your mini PMS is happening for a few years now.
So is PMS
a mini menopause?
It's a drop in your estrogen and progesterone in the middle of your normal cycle.
Yes.
No shit. I didn't know that.
That's when your body is like, oh, she didn't get pregnant. There's, the egg didn't get fertilized. We got to shed this lining. They drop the hormones. So you get to be basically the lowest level of estrogen and progesterone. And then you shed your lining, which is your period. And then you start all over again.
Wow. So will the things that you're saying that help for somebody in peri or menopause itself also help with PMS symptoms?
Yes.
That is a revelation.
It is for me too. I thought to myself, wow, the same things that we are doing to improve our nutrition during our cycle.
Yes.
We just expand on that. The late luteal phase, which is that PMS phase of the cycle, is what's happening. Now,
I kind of like that. That's not another name for menopause. I was going to say, I think it's sexier to say, I'm in my late luteal phase, not menopause.
The late luteal phase.
Luteal phase. But that's a period. Okay,
yeah, that's a period. That's the week before your period. That's PMS. So the one surprising thing that people have to understand is that hormone replacement therapy does not help with the weight gain part. The weight gain part is not an indication to go get hormones.
Okay.
The things that I told you about, the exercise changes, and I'll talk to you about more changes that we can do, more NEAT activity, more weight training.
Right.
That's going to help the weight loss.
Okay. What else do we need to do for the weight loss? Because I know everybody's leaning in.
Yes.
Because I thought if you get the patch, or the bioidenticals, your body will snap back into the way it's supposed to.
And that's what's so frustrating for women. The hot flashes definitely get better, right?
Yep.
Like that's one of the indications for hormonal therapy. People will have pain with sex or have dryness. That definitely, HRT definitely helps with that.
Okay.
But the weight gain portion is not so easy to address just with hormones because there's multiple things going on. Like you're less active, you're losing more muscle mass, you're also, your sleep is dysregulated. So then your appetite, as we talked about, your cravings, your hunger, your appetite are all increased because you're not sleeping well.
Yep.
So you end up having a situation that can't just be solved by adding hormones. I think about adding hormones like putting gas in your car. So you can add gas to your car, but if there's a traffic jam, you're not going anywhere. So our hormones are like a complicated highway system. Like we're, in LA right now, there's a complicated web of highways that are backed up. And doesn't matter how much gas you pump into the car, it's not going to go anywhere. So the ways to unclog that traffic, to keep that traffic moving, is the sleep, the exercise, the weight training, the food choices. So sleep is another thing. So as frustrating as it sounds, the more you can improve your sleep, the better that weight loss part will become because your appetite, as we said, your hormones, your hunger hormones are really dysregulated when you don't sleep.
Yes.
And so you want to have a good night's sleep, but often you can't sleep because your hormones are disrupted. So it's like the cycle. So one of the things I tell people is really, really try your best to improve your sleep hygiene. If you haven't started a routine to improve your sleep hygiene, start it now in perimenopause.
Okay, now tell us your top 3 things for a better night's sleep.
Top 3 things for a better night's sleep. Cold room.
Okay.
Your body temperature has to drop by 1 degree to fall asleep.
Oh.
So how do you get that done fastest? You could take a shower. You can cool down the room. You can get into pajamas that cool your body. You want to cool your core body temperature. That's how you'll fall asleep.
Love that.
Pitch black. If you can't control the curtains and the light, then wear a face mask or eye mask. There are good studies on the few studies that we have. One is on menopausal women. Even if you have an ambient light in the room, like a light coming through the window, it will stop weight loss if you're on a weight loss plan.
Really?
Circadian rhythm disruption, especially during that time, seems to really mess up the hormones in that sense. So you want to have a pitch black room. And then the third thing is you want a nightly routine. So you want to prepare your brain and your body for sleep because your body loves routines. Our bodies are built on rhythms and cycles.
Yes.
And if every night you go to sleep at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., and then so at 8:45, you start to turn off all the lights, you put away your phone, you start to brush your teeth, you're cluing in your body that it's time for sleep. So it's keeping that same time and routine is essential for good sleep. So people will sleep one day at 9 o'clock and the next day at 11 and the next day. They're massively disrupting their sleep cycles. And there's some data now that shows that it's maybe more important to stay on the same bedtime than even the total number of hours slept.
Wow. Are there certain foods that we should be eating more of or less of to help with the menopause symptoms and hormone regulation? And, for everybody's benefit, I just want to remind everybody, this is your second appearance. And we did a huge show on hunger and craving and the neuroscience and biology of it. And so that will be linked in the show notes along with both of your books. But, if you had to bottom line it for people that are, really wanting to use food to regulate hormone, like what are the top recommendations?
Remember that I likened it to PMS in the sense that you're less stress resilient. So what I mean is that the things that spike your cortisol, are just now more and at a lower threshold. Caffeine, alcohol, sugar.
Shit, are we not going to have fun now too? I mean,
it's like all the people say to me, I always drank this much caffeine and I always ate this much sugar.
Yes, or had a glass of wine or did whatever. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, and that's because now your hormones have changed and your metabolism changed. You're also less insulin sensitive. So, you've heard the term insulin resistance.
Yes, what does that mean?
So that happens during menopause.
What is insulin resistance?
Insulin resistance means that when the sugar is trying to get into your cells, the insulin has to open the door to let the sugar in. That's insulin.
Oh.
Yeah. So it usually matches, meaning that when you have a lot of...
So what does it mean when you're insulin resistant? The door is shut, the door is open?
The door is shut and you don't hear it as easily. Like you're knocking louder and louder to try to get in.
Oh.
And the insulin's like, dude, we just let sugar in. We're not going to let more sugar in. And the body's like, no, but I need to get it out of the bloodstream. I need to put it... And the insulin's like, no, but the cell is packed. It can't take any more sugar. And so while they're having these fights and discussion, that's called insulin resistance.
Oh.
And so when insulin resistance happens, the body gets signals to store fat, to say, let's get this sugar out of here because it's not going into the cell. So we got to put it somewhere. So we end up when insulin resistance happens, not only do you have a higher risk of getting type 2 diabetes because your sugar level's so high all the time, you also have more signaling to store fat.
Oh, man.
So insulin resistance is something that we can control by saying, well, if the cells are so full of sugar and they can't let any more sugar in.
You better eat some vegetables.
You better just cut some of that sugar out.
Okay.
And add in some things that, help you lower the blood sugar in your body, which is fiber. So fiber is one of the most helpful things that you can add to your diet, besides cutting down the sugar, because, if your cells are overwhelmed with sugar, cut down the sugar, add more fiber so that your blood sugar can be regulated in your body. Move more, like we said.
Yep. Add in weight training.
Sleep more. And remember the water that we talked about in the other episode. Water, our thirst centers are often mixed with our hunger centers. Like the signals can be mixed. So you want to hydrate enough so that you are not eating mindlessly. And then, of course,
and the trick there, just for those of you that have not heard the other episode, is when you feel your appetite coming on, in order to determine whether or not you just have a mindless craving, you can say, would I like a bowl of vegetables right now? And if the answer is no, that means you're not actually hungry. Another trick is drink a glass of water.
Yes.
Because that typically can satiate that appetite that flares up. Why do we have anxiety why is there an increase in anxiety during PMS and menopause?
Remember that sister, the progesterone sister?
Yes.
She was a calming one. She was the one who was keeping you chillaxed and careful. And when progesterone goes down, you don't have that chillaxer anymore. You don't have someone to keep you calm. Like that sister that was inside saying, like, calm down. It's okay, Mel. Like, you'll be fine. Your progesterone levels are lower. And all of a sudden, you are anxious about everything. The things that never made you anxious before are making you anxious. And the sleep, you wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe X, Y, and Z happened. And it starts a whole anxiety spiral. And a lot of women during menopause have crippling anxiety.
Does hormone replacement therapy tend to help with anxiety?
Yes, if progesterone replacement.
As a medical doctor, as a woman who is going through this right now, what do we do? Now that we know, what do we do?
Great question. So when I have patients come to me in clinic and we talk about menopause care, I do it in the form of a toolkit.
Okay.
We start with nutrition. We talk about movement and exercise. We talk about stress reduction, sleep optimization, Then we talk about pharmacologic options like hormone therapy, or if she's not a candidate, then other options for her based on her symptoms. Mm-hmm. We also talk about supplements that might be helpful.
So let's take these one at a time. Mm-hmm. Who is not a candidate for hormone replacement therapy?
Very few people, actually. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misconception around who can and can't take hormone therapy. Absolute contraindications: undiagnosed vaginal bleeding. You need to go see your gynecologist. You might need an ultrasound or biopsy. Like if you're having undiagnosed, we don't know why you're not bleeding normally, please go get that evaluated before we start hormone therapy.
Okay.
Because it might be a tumor that is estrogen fed. So we need to work on that. Active breast cancer, shouldn't be on estrogen therapy. Active blood clot, active stroke. Once those 6-month markers and the workup for those things have happened, it's a possibility.
Okay.
It's a nuanced conversation, but not an absolute contraindication. Neither is breast cancer.
Wow.
There are certain breast cancers that after treatment,
you could be a candidate.
Now, again, nuanced conversation, risks and benefits coming back and forth. Mm-hmm. A family history of breast cancer, not a contraindication. A family history of a blood clot or a history that you have of MTHFR or some of the blood clotting high-risk blood clots, as long as you avoid oral estrogen, we're not going to increase your clotting risk.
You're saying that even if you have a history of breast cancer, that does not
100% preclude you from having the option.
Gotcha. There are ways for you, with the counsel of your physician,
right,
to explore hormone replacement therapy, even if you have.
So the thing that a woman with breast cancer is most likely to die from is cardiovascular disease, not breast cancer. She's a 90% survival cure rate. And when we go through menopause, we see a dramatic uptick in our risk of cardiovascular disease. Actually, women on hormone therapy, if given at that we have a juicy window of opportunity, the first 10 years of your menopause, estrogen is protective. And women on HRT between 50 and 59-ish, or within those first 10 years, have a lower all-cause mortality, a lower cardiovascular disease death rate, and a lower cardiovascular disease at all, like death from cardiovascular disease or a heart attack.
Wow.
And let me tell you something else that'll blow your mind. So primary prevention strategies for cardiovascular disease. So women are given statins all the time for high cholesterol. Has never been shown to decrease her risk of cardiovascular death. Yes, in a man, but not in a woman. ACE inhibitors, and a blood pressure medication, is often recommended as primary prevention. Never been shown to be helpful in a woman, only in men. Aspirin, baby aspirin, never been shown to be primary preventative for a heart attack, only in men. Yet we're recommending this stuff to women all the time. And we've taken from many women the conversation or the option of hormone therapy is off the table when that is the one thing that is going to decrease her risk, besides lifestyle, of course.
Wow.
Yeah. That's when I get mad.
I can tell.
What are we doing?
I'm glad you're doing something. And I'm glad that you're here, because when you say it like that, it's outrageous. It makes you feel like we're guinea pigs.
We are more than our breasts.
Yep.
And you deserve the conversation. You deserve the option. For each woman, it is a risk to benefit ratio. I don't think every woman is going to choose hormone therapy, but I think every woman deserves the conversation based on modern medicine and what we know now.
Can you just quickly say why there is such a
hysteria?
Yes.
Yeah.
Around hormone replacement therapy?
I'll tell you why. A beautiful study. There's a little bit flawed in the way they set it up, because the average age in the study was 62, not 50, 51, when most women will go through menopause. So they did a study that was looking at just one particular type of hormone therapy, Premarin, which is CEE, conjugated equine estrogens. It was meant to show that, yes, hormone therapy is absolutely protective for cardiovascular disease. They had two groups, women who have a uterus, women who don't. And then the women with a uterus got estrogen plus a progestogen. And then the women without a uterus got estrogen only.
Okay.
And there was a placebo group in each set.
Okay.
And then they started them on hormone therapy, average age of 62, and then followed them.
And so they were outside the window
when
the
most
hormone
women would really start.
Yes.
So when they went back and stratified the data and looked at it, so what they said was, well, it doesn't really help cardiovascular disease. Well, no, because it's by the time you're 62, and they had women in their 70s in the study, they probably already had it, you know?
So is the bottom line that there was the biggest kind of study that was written about, the study itself was flawed, and then the reporting became hysterical?
Yes.
And the kind of lore.
Many of their findings at that hysterical reporting were walked back. There's only one that still stands, and it's still controversial.
And this is recently. Like recently, they have literally said that wasn't really accurate. It's not really true. And so the reason why it's important to say this is because there is this murmur out there that hormone replacement therapy
causes cancer,
is super dangerous, blah, 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 blah. And you're saying there are certain categories where you should not be on. But for the vast majority of the women in your life, this is an option you need to be exploring.
Yes.
And it's not only safe, it actually increases your health outcomes. So the majority of us are a safe candidate for hormone replacement therapy. What about supplements? Like, what are the supplements that we need to take?
We really should try to get most of our nutrients from food. And we only supplement where there's a gap or you have an allergy and intolerance. And then we go in from there. There are a few supplements that are essential nutrients that might be helpful, like turmeric, right? That's not anything we have to eat to survive, but it has some pretty powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties, and that someone might find helpful. But when we're talking about the vital things, if I had my top 3 things I would recommend to everyone,
yes.
Fiber. Track your fiber for a couple of weeks. Get a nutrition tracker. See where you're at. Fiber does so much in our bodies. Number 1, feeds the gut microbiome. That's its food. So that's the prebiotic.
Give me an example of what fiber
legumes.
Is. Who?
Legumes. So beans.
Okay.
Beans. So it's a class of beans. Peanuts are actually legumes as well. Typically really high in fiber.
Okay.
Berries, really high in fiber. Seeds and nuts, really high in fiber. Those are kind of avocado, or, that's my go-to to make sure I'm getting my fiber goal every day. Also has healthy fats and other vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Magnesium.
And this confuses me because I'm not quite sure what type of magnesium to take.
Oh, great question. Your glycinates, your tarates, your citrates, and L-theranates are good because they're readily absorbed into the bloodstream. So now we have nice magnesium levels in our blood. There's also benefit, some of them are better than others, about crossing that blood-brain barrier. So the brain protects itself. There's a membrane around the brain that it doesn't have this 100% free flow of nutrients back and forth. It's really selective about what it lets in. So mag-L-thyronate, which Magtine or Neuromag are the brand names, has been studied in SSRI-resistant depression. So antidepressant, resistant depression in patients. They've added in this. It seemed to be helpful. And my patients, followers, it's so helpful for sleep, anxiety. So I'm often recommending that one at night.
What one was that one?
Magnesium L-threonate.
Okay, so you're saying fiber's number 1, magnesium is number 2. How do you get magnesium naturally?
So pumpkin seeds, spinach, green leafy greens are rich in mag generally. I have a lot of lists on my website where we list all this
We will
stuff.
link to all this. And what's the third thing?
So I'm always looking at omega-3 fatty acids. Omegas are usually found in fatty fish, also in flax. One of my favorite ways, I'll do this little yogurt and I'll have flax, hemp, and chia seeds. So I'm just hitting all my antioxidants, my anti-inflammatory, my fiber all in one. So omega-3s, if you can't get a good source of that, that's a very reasonable thing to supplement every day. One of the richest sources of that is going to be your salmon, your mackerel, your tuna, your fatty fish, your cold water fish. And then I check a vitamin D level on every woman who'll let me stick a needle in her. 80% of my patients, not just low, I mean deficient. And there's a million reasons for this. We don't absorb it very well because our gut health declines. We're protecting our skin from the sun, which is another place. And we're not really creating it in our skin as fast as we used to. So, and vitamin D is a hormone that has a million, processes in the body. So I'm like, let's start here and get those vitamin D levels up because you're just not working as efficiently as you could.
A lot of us, I've noticed in my group chats with my girlfriends that when we finally get in to see somebody who knows what they're doing and you do a blood draw and you get your panels back, almost all of us have magnesium deficiency, vitamin B deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, and heightened cholesterol.
Yes. So again, about 70-80% of my patients have an unexplained, no changes in diet or exercise, rise in cholesterol, absolutely secondary to estrogen deficiency. And again, rushing to put her on a statin will make her cholesterol go down, but is not going to decrease her risk of cardiovascular disease. And women who are on HRT have higher HDLs and lower LDLs than women who are not when you compare the two groups. So just being menopausal is an independent risk factor for an unhealthy cholesterol profile.
So if you are eating the fiber and the magnesium and the omega-3s, and you're also taking the vitamin D supplement, how do you make sure that your body can actually absorb it or that your gut health is okay? Like, do you also recommend that people take a probiotic?
So I do. They've done some studies looking at probiotic supplementation in women with obesity and hypertension who are also postmenopausal. And there were some really positive results of, it's hard to measure gut health. We don't walk around with stool samples and they're counting the microbes in it. But when you're bloated, when you're having regular bowel movements, how you feel. When we go through menopause and lose our estrogen, the gut microbiome loses diversity. No matter how many probiotics you take or, there are things we can do, workarounds. But the loss of estrogen will change your gut microbiome to the profile of a man's.
Is that why we get a belly?
Part of it. That's part of it. So we know that an independent risk factor for visceral fat deposition, what we call belly fat in layman's terms, visceral fat means inside wrapping around the organs, inside the abdomen. That fat is very different than the curvy fat, than subcutaneous fat. That visceral fat is a marker for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, stroke. And so women who were on the probiotic versus placebo had lower blood pressure and lower visceral fat. Weights didn't change. Calories are still important, but they're not the only thing. But their visceral fat levels went down. So for that reason, I'm like, eat something rich in a probiotic every day. Yogurt, miso, kimchi, whatever floats your boat. If you can't tolerate that, then you want to consider supplementing.
Gotcha. Talk to us about exercise. So what kind of exercise is critical?
I grew up in the 80s and I was the cardio queen. I did so many step aerobics classes. I taught them. It would make your head spin. I can
actually see that. I would take a step aerobics class with you.
I did all of my exercise was to be thin.
Yep.
And to maintain a certain body shape that was part of my social currency. And if I could go back and talk to what I tell my children all the time, we need to move our bodies to be strong, not skinny. And that we are chipping away this constant caloric restriction and all this cardio is chipping away at our bone and muscle strength, which we are going to desperately need as we age, especially if you're built like me.
Yeah.
And I didn't pick up weights until I was well into my 40s. And there's never too late. Anybody listening at any age can start weight training. And you should. So I think that getting people to let go of this notion that thin is the way to be and that you're way better off having a little more curves and a lot more muscle is going to serve you in these menopausal years so much better than just being skinny.
I have followed all this advice and I have switched up the entire way I approach exercise. I now resistance train 3 days a week. And if you're having a hard time sleeping, what do you recommend?
Right. So we have to look at why you're having a hard time. Progesterone goes a long way to helping us sleep. And so estrogen leads to hot flashes and night sweats, which are completely sleep disruptive. I mean, even with hormone therapy, I still have a thermometer leg that I have to throw out occasionally.
A thermometer leg. So I was just talking to a friend this morning. She's like, oh, well, I just stick my leg out and the fan hits it. And that's how I cool myself down.
Yeah. And then you just throw it back in, throw it out, throw it back in. So I'm like, okay, let's get you on some estrogen.
Okay.
And so say she's had a hysterectomy and she doesn't have to have progesterone. Progesterone's an option. So I'm like, people sleep deeper. It has an anxiolytic effect.
What does that word
mean?
mean?
Anti-anxiety.
Anti-anxiolytic effect? Wow, that was
anti-anxiety effect.
Okay.
So if your sleep disruption is also you're having racing thoughts at night, you can't shut that brain off.
Yes. This is my daughter.
Progesterone is beautiful for these women, especially in perimenopause when we're skipping ovulations and we're not giving that monthly surge of progesterone.
Is this an option for somebody who's even before perimenopause?
Perimenopause. You could, yeah. Wow. Yeah, you can safely take progesterone every day, even if you're premenopausal.
Wow.
It can be really helpful.
Wow. All right.
So estrogen, progesterone, but also sleep hygiene. We can't negate the fact that we're on our phones too much at night, the blue light, not setting up an environment for good sleep, a snoring partner, especially some of it, and all the things we need to do to set ourselves up for success for sleep. And then when you sprinkle in the hormone changes, it's a disaster for some women. And that's really something I zero in on with my patients.
What do we need to know about alcohol?
I don't know any woman who's in her menopausal journey who is processing alcohol the way she used to. The tolerance seems to be going down. I'm excited to see some more research come out about this. But in my world, I have to go in my personal experience. If I'm choosing to have a drink, I am choosing not to sleep. I'm going to be up at 3, 2:32, 3:31, whatever it is. And it is like a bomb going off, even one glass. And I have to make that choice. I can't drink like I used to, thank God. Those college days. Most of the women in my practice and on social media are commenting. Every time I talk about it, they're like, yep, gave it up. It's not worth it.
If you're choosing to drink, you're choosing not to sleep. It really is that simple.
Yeah.
Wow.
So women, I've said this before, we're living longer, but we're living in poorer health. I don't want the longer lifespan if I'm going to be decrepit. And I'm going to be disabled. And my children are going to worry about me every day. I think that, as this next gen, our daughters come up through this and they have their options and they know what's happening in their bodies and they understand it. We're going to keep that lifespan, but we're going to improve our health span and make those choices that can lead to us having healthier lives.
Well, I think that's the really exciting thing of this, because when you don't understand what's happening, you get stuck in this cycle of feeling overwhelmed and that there's something wrong with you, and you're constantly complaining about the symptoms.
Your doctor didn't even understand.
Yeah, you're constantly complaining about the symptoms with your girlfriends and with your significant other, or complaining to your kids. But what you're also saying is not only can you get relief from the symptoms and feel like yourself again and really optimize your health, but that when you do so, it increases the quality of your life. And it increases your lifespan and it increases your vitality over that lifespan. And that's why this is so important. One of the greatest things about social media is that this is the first time in history that women in our age group actually have found each other.
Yeah.
And have started collectively saying, what's going on with my weight? What's going on with my joint pain? What's going on with my brain fog? And you don't feel alone. Of course, I knew that the hot flash was from menopause. I had no idea that the brain fog was menopausal. I had no idea that some of the joint pain was an issue. And I certainly knew that the sex drive lowering was part of what was going on. But I'll tell you, it was really when the belly fat and the back fat that I started to gain. And I was so demoralized because I'm the kind of person that exercises 6 days a week. I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to be doing. And even more so, I had stopped drinking during the week. So I had lowered my drinking significantly, and nothing was doing anything. My pants were not fitting. And it was so weird because I felt swollen all the time. And it's almost like certain parts of my body didn't change, but I just had this tire around my center. And people would be like, well, but you're still really thin. I'm like, but that's not the point.
Right. That is where I put my toe in the water of all this menopause stuff. You were me. That is my exact story.
I literally hated the way my body looked. I was self-conscious around my husband of 28 years.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to see me naked because I literally was like, I have rolls in my back. When I put my underwear on, I've got my skin hanging out over it. I do not know what to do. And so from a pure vanity and confidence, and I just want to feel like myself, and this doesn't feel fair standpoint, I started to like go get wackadoodle about it.
Yeah,
do I have to stop eating? Do I have to like exercise like crazy? What do I need to do? Like, what is happening? And discovering that it was menopause, it only kind of went, okay, great. But then when I went to my doctor and they're like, oh,
work out
got
more,
6
eat
or
less.
7 years. Yeah. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. Exact same thing happened to me. The same feelings. I was weighing myself. You know, you had to pee in the middle of the night because menopause. I would weigh myself
in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night.
No wonder you weren't going back to sleep. You're
and
like,
oh my God, you know. And what is this constantly grabbing my belly?
Yes.
So, my husband was like, he was going on a trip. I said, when you get back, you're going to have the wife you deserve. I'm going to get this fat under control. And he was like, I love you. I think you're beautiful. Your girls are watching this behavior. And he said, you're a smart girl. Figure this out. You're a scientist. And he got on the plane. And I took that as, you know, I'm going to figure this out. That I called the PhD nutritionist at the university I was employed at. I was like, what the hell is going on in menopause? Because my patients can't lose it. I'm struggling. I'm starving myself. I'm working out all the time. They're like, yeah, there's something going on in menopause. We think it has to do with inflammation. Read all these articles. And hence began the rabbit trail for me.
Yes.
Of going down, well, the rabbit hole. And I was like, whoa, inflammation, estrogen, visceral fat. What is this visceral fat thing? No one ever taught me that in school. Whoa, my diabetes risk. Let me check my cholesterol. Holy shit, it's elevated. Like, yes. Oh my God. And then that's why I wrote the book, to put it all together.
Can you talk about why your sexual health is so important, especially during hormone changes like menopause?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm a menopause certified practitioner. So you can sort of become a menopause certified practitioner by going through the Menopause Society. And, you know, during menopause, our body goes through these immense changes, right? Our estrogen drops precipitously. So what happens when your estrogen drops precipitously is the tissues in your vagina and your vulva, they all change. They all become, the lubrication that you produce decreases. That can make sex more uncomfortable. That can make you more uncomfortable just sitting day to day, right? Your labia tend to shrink. Like, imagine any part of male genitalia shrunk. Like, it would be insane. Like, there'd be tons of papers about it, right? But there's no real like, okay, women's labia shrink.
Does that matter?
Well, you know, there's a couple things.
Because the labia is just the curtains on the outside, right?
But they're there as a protection, right? They're to protect you from friction. They're there to protect you from bacteria. And so what happens a lot of the times, say you're not sexually active, say you're not interested in being sexually active, it puts you at higher risk of getting recurrent UTIs. So you mentioned earlier. Yes.
The outside being smaller?
Well, so that's part of it. The other part of it is the urethra shrinks a little, the tissues around the urethra shrink, so the opening becomes closer.
Oh.
And most importantly is the vaginal tissue's pH changes. So when you lose estrogen, you lose these good bacteria called lactobacilli in the vagina. And that keeps your pH acidic. And so when you go through menopause, your pH goes up and you're at higher risk for infections. And what a lot of people don't know is that treating yourself with vaginal estrogen actually prevents UTIs and can actually cure you of recurrent urinary tract infections.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What predicts a great sex life, particularly as you get older?
Yeah, so I think realizing that things are changing. So having a great sex life as you get older is one, like allowing yourself to acknowledge these changes and then identifying them, right? And saying like, okay, you know, my lubrication's not great. Maybe I would benefit from hormone therapy, or maybe using just a lubricant, right? And adding that in. And everyone should be using lubricant. It's great. It makes things more fun, more slippery, right? And there's different kinds of lubricants available. Some are long acting, some are short acting. If you're using a water-based lubricant, I'll just tell you, make sure you reapply. It'll evaporate. It's water-based, right? So you can use different types, you can experiment, but really identifying like, okay, my body's changing. It doesn't mean that I can't have sex anymore. It doesn't mean that I can't enjoy sex anymore. It's a matter of identifying what the issues are and then investigating, seeing a doctor to get evaluated to see how can we help you. Has a doctor asked you about your orgasms? Have they asked you about your pleasure? Because that's what matters, right? And so like talk about those things with your doctor. And if they're not talking to you about it, find someone who will.
Is pain normal during sex?
pain should never be normal. So I think people always make this assumption, right? Like, oh, it's okay, have a glass of wine, or you can have sex and the first time will be painful. It shouldn't be, right? It's probably painful because you're rushing, or maybe you have actually an abnormality. Something is going on. Maybe your pelvic floor is abnormal. Maybe maybe you have endometriosis. Maybe there's a medical condition there that needs to be uncovered, but sex should not be painful. And, yes, sometimes there are like very large phalluses, which can be uncomfortable. And there are actually products you can buy that you can put on the phallus so less of it gets inserted. Sometimes you will see people have pain with that, or
in terms of the end of it hitting your cervix or something.
Correct.
Okay.
So there are some, obviously there's some cases where like you can't deal with anatomy. Maybe that's just not the right, that size is too big. That's okay. You can still address that. But otherwise, there should be ways for you to find pleasurable positions or comfort during sex. It should not be painful. And you shouldn't be rushing, right? A lot of people rush through sex and they're not allowing themselves to get lubricated. They're not allowing those changes to happen. And then if you do all those things, you're still having pain, see a doctor.
Yeah, team menopause. I'm on it too. So I would say that menopause is a normal part of the ovulatory cycles that we have. And just like you went through puberty, which might have been challenging and had some symptoms and caused a lot of physical changes with your body, that menopause is in many ways the same thing. You can think about it as puberty in reverse. It is, not a sign that your body is going to fall apart the next day. It is not some new experience. I know there's a lot of people out there who think that, because women are living longer now, they're just experiencing menopause, but that's not true. The ancient Greeks knew that the average age was about 50, which is about what it is now. And if we erase menopause, then we erase all the grandmothers in history, right? So that it is a normal experience, but normal doesn't have to mean pleasant, right? So just like when you went through puberty, maybe you got acne, or maybe you had really heavy irregular periods, or pregnancy, also a normal experience. Maybe you had terrible nausea and vomiting. Maybe you had other complications. So normal things can have complications. And I would say that there are things about menopause that can be very unpleasant for people. There's things that can be very liberating. People who've had terrible, painful periods who now don't have them think it's amazing. People who've had maybe terrible PMS find that the steady, the lack of ups and downs of hormones are liberating. And so I would say that if you're suffering, there is often medical treatment for that. And that the best way to know how to make it a more pleasant experience or less onerous experience, depending on the spectrum you're on, is to get informed and have accurate information.
I've never heard anybody call it puberty in reverse. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, just like it's a different physiologic process, but you have a winding up, right? So when you go through puberty, you don't start and bang on, have cycles regular. They sort of start and stop. They might be heavy. They have that sort of like flirting with it, if you will. Well, you have that same in kind of the last couple of years. You have the starting and stopping with the periods. You're having the winding down of ovulation, and so so they're like bookends, a little bit different. Maybe like sisters, not twins. I don't know.
What is happening to the body when you're going through menopause?
Yeah, so the menopause transition, which is the time leading up to menopause that, you might also heard called perimenopause or premenopause.
How long does that last?
Well, anywhere kind of from sort of 4 to 10 years, depending. Just kind of like puberty, right? Like a big range in how long it can last. Some people seem to have these late growth spurts, goes on forever. Some people relatively short, kind of the same thing.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. So when you were talking about puberty, I was just thinking about getting my period. I wasn't thinking about all the other things that happened, like your breasts coming in, your body shape changing, the fact that you grow taller. Do we shrink when we're going through menopause?
Not really. Certainly if you develop osteoporosis, you can, but no, otherwise not. And it would be rare to develop osteoporosis in your late 40s or early 50s. That would be really a sign. There'd usually be something else going on significant. But over time, if you have osteoporosis, you certainly can lose height, and we want to protect that. But yeah, puberty is a many years experience, right? You start to get pubic hair, you start to grow, you get breast buds, your body shape changes. You may have mood swings, you may have acne, you sort of this whole experience. And just like puberty might have ended at a different time for different people. Some people stopped growing in grade 7. I was still, growing in grade 10, grade 11, right? You have this big range. It's the same thing with the menopause transition. And so I just encourage people to think about it more that way, that it is a change. And these changes, don't happen overnight. And it does suck that you get to go through it twice, and people without ovaries only get to go through it once. But yeah, so it's this physiologic change, and it's related to the decrease in the number of follicles or eggs that can ovulate. And so what happens sort of in response to the decreasing levels of estrogen that are produced, you get other hormonal changes. Your brain is trying harder to get the ovaries to ovulate. It can start to get discoordinated. So you might get one ovulation right on top of each other. So some cycles you might have higher estrogen levels than normal. Some cycles you may not have progesterone. Some cycles might be shorter. Some you might develop estrogen, not get progesterone, but still menstruate. So it's basically hormonal chaos. And so people mistakenly think of it as sort of this gradual, smooth transition, but it's more like, but obviously there's variation. My best friend had regular cycles, and then her period stopped and she had one hot flash. And I'm like, that's kind of the equivalent of showing up.
That's a unicorn.
Well, that's like showing up at the hospital and you're like, oh, I feel little contractions, and you're like 9 centimeters and you go, oh, and the baby comes out, right? Like there's, there are people who have those experiences, and then there's people who have, 72-hour labors, right? So it's this wide experience, and there are many things that can affect it.
Dr. Gunter, what are the biggest myths of menopause?
Well, oh gosh, the biggest myth. I would say the biggest myth is that your life is over. That this is the end. Maybe it's the fact they just don't care anymore because they're older. It's wisdom with age. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it's the fact that all of the part of your brain that was tied up with ovulation is now gone because your brain prunes pathways it doesn't need anymore. I mean, I don't know the answer. But I would say that, for some people it can be very rocky, and for some people it isn't. And for people who it's very rocky, we have treatment.
That's true. I think the biggest myth, if I'm kind of just thinking about what my friends are talking about, is that you're going crazy. And it feels very liberating when a doctor tells you, oh, that brain fog, that can be explained by menopause. Oh, frozen shoulder, that can be explained by menopause. And so understanding that there's an underlying reason for all of these things suddenly coalescing, for me, has been the biggest, most liberating thing, is to kind of understand what's going on instead of feeling like I'm a victim to what's going on.
Yeah, I think education about how your body works is very liberating. So then you don't think that you're uniquely broken or uniquely crazy or something, that what is specific, why is my body behaving this way and no one else's? And you're like, oh, lots of people are behaving this way. Okay, I don't feel so alone. So sometimes there's kind of safety or comfort in numbers.
What are the top 3 non-hormone interventions that you recommend all women do to impact their health?
Well, I would say the top recommendation is exercise. I would put that over hormones. Absolutely.
But in menopause in particular, how come?
Well, exercise touches almost every single domain that is affected by menopause. So if you think that menopause can start to change the trajectory for, risk of osteoporosis and risk of dementia, risk of muscle loss, all of these things, exercise touches all of those domains. So in the menopause transition, there's an increased risk of depression. Exercise can treat depression. Exercise can help protect bone mass. Exercise can help build muscle strength, build muscle mass. Exercise is great for your heart. It's great for your brain. Basically, exercise treats almost everything in menopause except hot flashes and vaginal dryness. I mean, and we have great medications for those. So, so what I'm saying is that, going into menopause with that strong foundation, and it's not just, cardio, resistance training. Exercise helps with your balance, so you're less likely to fall. I mean, the number one risk factor for breaking a bone is actually falling, right? So, so all of these things can be protected with exercise, but that's not a sexy sell. Like if you could only ever do one thing for your health, it would be to get your exercise. I mean, and you don't want to play favorites and say, well, you can only do one thing, but you get what I mean. I'm just trying to emphasize how important exercise is and resistance training and building muscle. And I'm always inspired by all these women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s on Instagram that are like showing like they're flexing and their backs are they're just like cut. And I'm just like, oh yeah.
Never too late.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on it. So I exercise, eating, 25 grams of fiber a day, trying to have, more protein. Many women don't eat enough protein, and trying to have more plant-based protein in your diet and having more vegetables. I mean, it's not the sexy stuff, but it's the stuff. And then obviously not smoking.
Dr. Gunter, I just love how you explain this stuff. What is hormone replacement therapy?
So menopausal hormone therapy, which is what we call it, is giving hormones to treat symptoms of menopause or to prevent complications associated with menopause, like osteoporosis.
Can you explain the different types of hormone replacement therapies, Dr. Gunter?
Yeah, so there's evidence-based, FDA approved, and then there are scams. I would think that's the best way to sort it out. So many people get hung up on the term bioidentical, which is really a meaningless term. It's a medically meaningless term. Whether a hormone is the same or similar to what your body makes doesn't make it safe. I could give you a high amount of epinephrine and cause harm to you, but that's something your body makes, right? So I can give somebody tons of estrogen and give them endometrial cancer. So whether something's similar to what your body makes or not doesn't make it safe. What makes it safe is it studied? Is it safe? Is it effective? And is it something that can be, we know exactly how much you're getting?
Menopause. You talked about menopause earlier.
Yes. Do we have to? I mean, Jesus. Okay.
Why?
What do you want to know?
Why did you respond like that?
Because it's really confounding. And it's confounding because I don't even know if that's the right word. It's overwhelming. Everybody my age is talking about it because what happens is you start to lose control of your body and you're going through all of these changes that you feel like you are not in control of. And so, I realize I look like a very lean person. And so the truth is that I am a very lean person. I have not changed my habits in, 8 years. I have very, very healthy habits because I force myself to do things I don't feel like doing. And yet they're not working. And my body is expanding and brain fog is increasing. And I am like a furnace to sleep next to at night. And all of which is a function of the changing levels of estrogen in my body. And what's very challenging about dealing with kind of hormone changes is that there's so much conflicting advice out there. And to truly know what's going on in your body, you have to be drawing blood. You have to be looking at what's going on the inside. That is extremely expensive for most people. It also is a big maintenance issue. It's a gigantic pain in the ass. And it doesn't feel like anybody really has a good handle on this. And I think as a woman, it's very frustrating to know that women were not even involved in medical research until the late 80s. And it's even more frustrating to know, and look, I could be wrong on this, but we had an expert on our show explain that they only use postmenopausal women because they don't want women's hormones to throw off the results of the testing that they're going through with medication. And so it just feels like a massive gray area for more than half the population. Our entire network from the brain through the entire body is running on estrogen. There's new research around like just stopping menopause altogether because women's I'm not a medical expert, so I'm trying to learn all this stuff to educate myself. Do I take a pill? Do I put a cream on? Do I have this little patch? Do I sleep on a pad that makes me cold so my husband won't like complain that I'm sweating like through the sheets? Do I do on bamboo shit? Like it is so overwhelming. And I even feel my cheeks getting hot. So it could be a hot flash coming on. I don't know. All I know is I'm drinking my water and I'm taking my progesterone and I'm doing my estrogen patch. And now I've tried the blood draws and everybody has a different opinion. Is it your gut health? Is it your estrogen health? I don't know. I just know my body is changing. And some days I feel like a mare that's being put out to pasture. And part of the issue is the lifespan. We have, if you think about it, like our life expectancy has way eclipsed the fertility cycle of women. And so we now, for most of us, will have another 30 or 40 years if we take care of ourselves. And that's a long time to live a very vibrant and amazing life, which I believe that we can. And to have a body where your entire system needs estrogen and yet your body is starting to lose it. And so that's part of the reason why there's so much interesting research going on around whether or not the answer is to just keep us menstruating so that we're naturally producing this in our bodies.
So interesting. It's funny because I'm not going to go through menopause myself.
Well, that would be interesting.
But obviously...
You'll do menopause, though, because you'll probably have a drop in testosterone.
I will.
Uh-huh.
But on the subject of menopause, I'm going to be surrounded by women that are going to go through it.
Oh, my God, and bitchy and bloated and all the bees. So get ready.
And I want to make sure I understand. That's why I'm so curious about it. But it's crazy thing is, I only learned about it like a year ago on this
Wait, you didn't know about menopause?
No.
Well, that's true. You're a 30-year-old man. Why, or 31. Why would you know about menopause?
I learned from interviewing people on this podcast, and I became so fascinated by it because people aren't talking about it enough, or at least they haven't historically. The conversation has, in my view, has risen in cultural popularity over the last couple of years. But
here's my take on it, Stephen. Thank God it has.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the fact that women were not included in the medical research until the late 80s. And you realize that more than half the population are women, and that menopause and women's hormone health was a chapter in the OB-GYN schooling. And it is an enormous part of how a woman's body functions. Like if we pull away all the skin, and what you see is all the wiring. The fuel that is really circulating through a woman's body is estrogen and other hormones. This is, again, I am not a medical expert. I am just a woman who is trying desperately to figure out how to make sense of an extraordinarily important topic that until recent years has not been looked at with the scientific rigor that it deserves and demands, and that women around the planet need. And it has just been kind of like an afterthought that, okay, you're going to take some hormones and then that'll be that, and you'll be through it. I mean, most of the advice that I got when I started to get the thickening and the hot flashes started to come, and it's too much information for me to talk about all the other symptoms that you may feel when you go through menopause, is basically like, well, it'll take about 10 years and then you'll bounce back. That is not acceptable when it comes to how we can care for and empower more than half of the people on this planet. And it is exciting, though, because I do believe that somebody will figure this out soon, that there will be more research. There already are companies popping up all over the place that are doing really exciting stuff. It's just kind of one of these issues that's really confusing, because if you Google it or you listen to an expert on the topic, it really does depend on your personal history. Because if you've had any form of breast cancer or history of that in your family, it can be very dangerous or life-threatening for you to take hormones. And so, again, I have a lot to say about this because I'm in the middle of it, but I don't know a lot. And I think that's the thing that's scary. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe, because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.